So guys, after brainstem, let's start with the cerebellum. As we already discussed the sequence, we are discussing neuroanatomy that we started with the spinal cord, going to the brainstem, and now we'll talk about something which is developing along with the pons only, and cerebellum in between. We already discussed the fourth ventricle. Once the cerebellum is done, then we can move toward the higher center. We'll talk about the cerebrum and the gray and the white matter. And this sequence is going to help us because whatever tracks we discussed in the spinal cord, they have helped us immensely in the brainstem to understand the lemniscus and the syndromes. Now, knowing about the nuclei in the brainstem and certain tracks which are coming from spinal cord and they will go into cerebellum, so we can understand the cerebellar peduncle also in a better way. So we'll start with the classification of cerebellum. Well, the classification of the cerebellum, one of the classification is based on its evolution. The part of the cerebellum which is oldest to develop, that is called as an archaeocerebellum. The one which comes after that, the next to appear, is called as a paleocerebellum. And the most recent, the largest and the most advanced part of cerebellum, which is having a connection with the cerebrum, that is what you call as a neocerebellum. So let's understand the anatomy of the cerebellum first on the basis of its evolution. So we'll first better be drawing it here. Let's say this is the midline band which is connecting both the cerebellar hemisphere, that is called as the vermis. Vermis is a midline band which is connecting the two cerebellar hemisphere. Let's say this is the right and the left cerebellar hemisphere. So look at the part which I'm making it dark here, this portion, that's the rostral part of the vermis, and this is the caudal part of the vermis here. Along with this extension coming from this caudal part, which is called as the flocculus. Now this is the part of cerebellum I was talking about, which is oldest, which is the oldest from the evolutionary history point of view, and this portion is what you call as the archaeocerebellum. We'll write this classification also separately. I just wanted to write these names as of now. This part of the vermis is called as lingula. This here is nodule, and this is what you call as the flocculus. That is flocculus. Lingula, nodule, and flocculus. In fact, nodule and flocculus together are called as flocculonodular lobe. They are also regarded as flocculonodular lobe. So I can say lingula, that is one part of the vermis there. And then we have this nodule and flocculus or flocculonodular lobe, that the oldest part of the cerebellum when it comes to their evolution. You know, this vermis, this midline band is having many names like lingula, pyramid, diclite, folia. So there are many fancy names given to the different part of the vermis. For the classification point of view, if you just remember the important one, that is like good enough. After that, the next part to develop, the next part to evolve in the cerebellum was the small anterior lobe, and some part of the vermis in the posterior lobe as well. I'm using a different color to highlight that. So this is the anterior lobe. So cerebellum is having basically small anterior and a huge posterior lobe. So this anterior lobe along with this portion of vermis which is in relation to posterior lobe is the next to develop. So let me label this. This is anterior lobe. And what are these two parts? These two parts of vermis are called as the pyramid and uvula. Pyramid and uvula. That is pyramid and uvula. Well, obviously don't compare this pyramid with the pyramidal tract or uvula with the uvula, obviously in oral cavities. Well, nothing to do with them. It's just that I told you that different fancy name given to the different part of vermis. So anterior lobe, pyramid and uvula will come into the paleocerebellum. They are the one which evolved after archaea. And the most recent is the neocerebellum, which includes this posterior lobe, this large posterior lobe, obviously, except pyramid and uvula. From the posterior lobe, you remove pyramid and uvula, the rest of the posterior lobe comes under the neocerebellum. So this is a diagram just to show the three different part: arche, paleo, and neocerebellum. Let's write down this classification as well. So here we go. This is so we said we can divide it in three parts. We got a arche cerebellum, we got this paleo cerebellum, and then we have neocerebellum. Arche, paleo, and neocerebellum. Well, as I already mentioned, based on their evolutionary history, this arche cerebellum is the oldest. This arche cerebellum is the oldest part of cerebellum. Paleocerebellum is the one which is next to appear or next to evolve, and the most recent part is neocerebellum. The important thing to note, they are also having a different name based on their what part they are connected to. Like arche cerebellum is mainly having its connection to the vestibular nuclei, and that is why it is important to note that arche cerebellum, it is also known as it is also known as the vestibular cerebellum. It is also known as the vestibular cerebellum, which tells that it is having a connection with the vestibular nuclei. Then paleocerebellum is that part of cerebellum which receives the afferent tracts coming from the spinal cord. Remember the unconscious proprioception coming from upper limb and lower limb? So those tracts which are coming from the spinal cord, so having a connection with the spinal cord, this portion of cerebellum, it is also regarded as spinal cerebellum. Spinal cerebellum. And here we have the third part, the one which processes this information and also gives the feedback to the cerebrum. How cerebellum will coordinate a movement by taking an afferent from different the tracts which are coming in. It processes the information and gives the feedback. Cerebellum cannot change the movement. All cerebellum can do is cerebellum can inform the cerebrum, because the changes has to be done by cerebrum only. This is the only thing which can make a muscle move. That's why neocerebellum, it is also known as cerebral cerebellum. You will see it is having a connection with the cerebral hemisphere, so we call it cerebral cerebellum. Vestibular cerebellum, spinal cerebellum, cerebral cerebellum, another name given to arche, paleo, neocerebellum, based on what part they are connected to mainly. What comes under these, we have already discussed that, but no harm in writing it again. Like what was there in the paleocerebellum, in the arche cerebellum? It was lingula and the flocculonodular lobe. Lingula and flocculonodular lobe comes into the arche. Paleocerebellum, on the other hand, includes that small anterior lobe plus some part of the posterior lobe. And what part was that? That was a part of the vermis called as pyramid and uvula. Pyramid and uvula. And neocerebellum or cerebral cerebellum, it consists of the largest posterior lobe, the large posterior lobe, of course, except pyramid and uvula, which is already there in the paleo, except pyramid and uvula. So that is about the classification. I mean, what three parts we have, you already saw it in the diagram. And then we see that they ask this direct question that which part of the cerebellum comes under arche, this paleo, and neocerebellum. Now, question is, what are their functions? Although we'll be discussing especially the function of neocerebellum separately, but if I broadly talk about the function, it's the arche cerebellum which is responsible for the axial stability or axial equilibrium. Axial stability or axial equilibrium, that is a function of arche. Paleocerebellum, well, it works for appendicular stability. It works for the appendicular stability. And neocerebellum is the one which is responsible for the smooth execution of the movement, because it is the one giving feedback to cerebrum, and cerebrum will then will allow certain, we need to chop down some movement. Like if you're doing a movement, somebody having a cerebellar ataxia will obviously show the features like there will be intentional tremors. When you try to approach something, then you will have an intentional tremors, because the excessive movement is not being cut, it is not being deduced, and because the neocerebellum probably is not working. So neocerebellum, because it controls or it gives the feedback to cerebrum, and cerebrum is the one which is controlling the movement. So ultimately, when a smooth execution of movement is done, we say it is done by the neocerebellum. It is for the smooth execution of voluntary movement. So this is about the classification. Well, the core anatomy of the, this is, so basically classification is about the evolution and all. Now coming to the core anatomy of cerebellum, we'll be discussing it in three part mainly. First, we'll talk about the cerebellar cortex, that's the gray matter of the cerebellum, and we'll see what type of cells are present inside and their function. Then we go inside, that is in the white matter of the cerebellum, where we have some deep cerebellar nuclei are also there. And finally, in the cerebellum, we'll talk about the three major peduncles. The peduncle, that is superior, middle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle, and what tracts are passing through them. The major tracts are passing through them. So again, just to give you an idea about how we're going to approach it, let's say if I slice section through the cerebellum, so let's say this is a superior cerebellar peduncle, this here is middle cerebellar peduncle, and that is inferior cerebellar peduncle. And you already know the three peduncles are connecting it to three different parts of the brainstem. There is superior cerebellar, middle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle. Inside, let's say this here is the gray matter. So what I've highlighted here is the peripherally placed gray matter. Just like cerebrum, even cerebellum is having a gray matter on its periphery. So cerebellar cortex, gray matter, that is the cerebellar cortex. This is the first thing we'll be discussing. After cerebellar cortex, we'll be talking about this white matter. White matter, and within the white matter of the cerebellum, we have some very important nuclei. These are called as deep cerebellar nuclei, like dentate, emboliform. We'll be looking at all of them. So we have some deep cerebellar nuclei present inside. Right, so this is our goal. That's how we're going to approach this topic. We'll be discussing it in four parts. We'll start with the cortex. We'll look into deep cerebellar nuclei. We'll talk more about the white matter, some afferent fibers in cerebellum, and at last we'll talk about the peduncles, the superior, middle, and inferior cerebellar peduncles. So starting with the cortex first, guys, the cerebellar cortex. Histologically, cerebellar cortex is made up of three layers. So there are three layers of cerebellar cortex. If I just write it first, the three layers which are, we have first the outermost layer is called as the molecular layer. We're going from outside to inside, from periphery to deep. So we have a molecular layer. Then we have middle layer made up of Purkinje cells, so we call it Purkinje layer. And then we got an inner layer, inner layer which is made up of granule cells and other things. So we call it granular layer. It looks granular in appearance, so we call it a granular layer. So these are three layers of the cerebellar cortex, and we are talking about these layers superficial to deep. This is from superficial to deep. if I schematically draw these three layers, let's say this is the a section we took from the gray matter area, that is from the cortex. Let's see, we took a small section from the gray matter, and we said we got three layers in it. This is going to be the molecular, the Purkinje, and the granular. Molecular layer. Now, layers are three, but when you talk about number of cells present inside, there are 5 types of cells in total present inside the cerebellar cortex. 5 types. Now, we got a cells which are present very much at the periphery here. We call them the stellate cells. And apart from stellate cells, we have other type of cell present, but that is not very much at the periphery. That's the way we differentiate them, and we call them basket cells. So on a stellate cells and basket cells. We know few things about the stellate and basket cells, but not everything. I mean, still we don't know much about what exactly stellate and basket cells are doing. They both are supporting cells for sure. They both are supporting cells. So one thing from here to be remembered, that if you look at the section of the cerebellum, if they ask that what is the most peripheral cell you'll see or the most superficial cell you'll see, so stellate cells. Stellate means star shaped. So from that you can remember the star should be the highest. The highest cell that you have in the cortex are stellate. Purkinje layer obviously will be having these large flask-shaped Purkinje cells. We have these flask-shaped Purkinje cells which are having their dendrites in the layer above, that is in the molecular layer, and their axon will be seen leaving the gray matter and going into white matter. So these big cells here, these are the Purkinje cells. Obviously the largest one also, these are the Purkinje cells. Purkinje with the dendrite extending into molecular layer, and the axon through the granular layer, they will go from gray matter to white matter. And guys, finally, in the granular layer, we have 2 types of cell mainly. We have a granule cell. So let's say these are the granule cells we have. The Golgi cells and granule cells. And these granule cells are very, very important in this discussion. I'll tell you why. That's a granule cell here. So we got Golgi cells, and the one which I drew it like this in a vertical fashion, that is the granule cells. So total how many? Total 5 types of cells situated in the 3 layers of cerebellar cortex. Now out of 5 types of cell, the important thing to note is that only granule cell out of these is excitatory in nature. This is excitatory cell. The rest all are inhibitory. So one thing which we can depict from here is that we have total 5 cells in the gray matter, that is constituting the entire gray matter of the cerebellum, and out of which 4 cells are inhibitory, which tells me that cerebellar cortex is the largest collection of inhibitory neuron in the entire central nervous system. Nowhere else you will see that many inhibitory neurons at one place in the gray matter. So this is to be noted that cerebellar cortex is the largest collection of inhibitory neurons. Largest collection of inhibitory neurons. It is also to be noted that Purkinje cells, there are 2 important points here. The Purkinje cells, well, of course, they are the largest cells. Quite evident that they are the largest cells amongst all the cells in the gray matter, obviously, we're talking about. And Purkinje cells are the only efferents. They're the only efferents, but the important word here is from where? From the cortex, guys. Cortex. I'm just double underlining this word, the cortex. Purkinje cells are the largest cells, and they are the only efferent from the cortex. That means out of the 5 types of cell, the only cell which you see going out of the cerebellar cortex and coming into white matter is the Purkinje cell. But sometimes people misread this information. Purkinje cells are the only efferent from the cortex. That doesn't mean Purkinje cells are going out of the cerebellum only. No, they're not. Purkinje cells are coming from gray matter into white matter. And then from white matter, other cells will start. So cortex is an important term here. Only efferent from cortex are the Purkinje cell. In fact, I want you to understand this in this schematic picture. We already drew this one. So if I have to show you Purkinje cell in this picture, guys, where the Purkinje cell would be? Now Purkinje cell is present in the gray matter. Let's say somewhere here is the Purkinje cell. The dendrites will be like this in the layer above. Axon, as I said, will come out of the cortex and into the gray matter. Now look at that. Now when the axon come into the gray matter, we have what over there? We have a deep cerebellar nuclei. And from these deep cerebellar nuclei, you will see the efferent going out of the cerebellum. So these are two different questions. If the question says efferent coming out of the cortex, yes, answer is Purkinje cell. But if the question says efferent going out of the cerebellum itself, then your answer will be deep cerebellar nuclei. Purkinje cell is not going out; it's a deep cerebellar nuclei which will forms the efferent, and that goes out of the cerebellum. So you can add this in this part here, that when you see these Purkinje cell coming out into the white matter, so this is going to the deep cerebellar nuclei. So that projects to the deep cerebellar nuclei, and this deep cerebellar nuclei is the point from where the efferent will be given off out of cerebellum. And this time I'm not saying cortex, I'm simply saying cerebellum. So just one word, it completely changes the questions. Efferent from the cortex, Purkinje cell. Efferent from cerebellum, deep cerebellar nuclei. Efferent from cerebellum, deep cerebellar nuclei. Now the question is, what exactly are these deep cerebellar nuclei? We talked about the 5 types of cell we have in the cortex. Now coming to the white matter, where we have these deep cerebellar nuclei. Let me write in short, guys. That is deep cerebellar nuclei. So we can remember these deep cerebellar nuclei in the alphabetic sequence as in D, E, F, G. D, E, F, G. Where D stands for the dentate nucleus. D stands for dentate nucleus. E is for emboliform. E is emboliform. F is for the fastigial nucleus. F is for the fastigial nucleus. And finally this G is for globose. Globose or globosus, whatever you call it, globose nucleus. Dentate, emboliform, fastigial and globose. Now please note that out of all these dentate nucleus, if you look at the shape of the dentate nucleus, it is something like this. Just like we saw the inferior olivary nucleus in the medulla oblongata, it is like crumbled bag-like or crumbled paper-like nucleus. If you take a piece of paper and you crumble it, so it's like a crumbled paper-like nucleus. We call it a dentate nucleus. And this dentate nucleus, without a doubt, is the largest nucleus of the cerebellum. And also it is the nucleus of, now that's important, it's a nucleus of neocerebellum. It is a nucleus of neocerebellum. Now understand this point here when I say nucleus of neocerebellum. Now some of these nucleus are nucleus of neocerebellum, like this one, then a nucleus of paleocerebellum. So what do you mean by nucleus of neocerebellum? How much or which part of the cerebellum was neocerebellum? It was the posterior lobe. That means any Purkinje fiber coming from the posterior lobe, that is from the neocerebellum, those Purkinje fibers will come to the dentate nucleus. And then from the dentate nucleus, the efferent will go out. Like I showed you this picture here, if I again show you. So let's presume, let's imagine this is the posterior lobe here. That is neocerebellum. So from neocerebellum, these Purkinje cells will come to this dentate nucleus. And from dentate nucleus the fibers will go out. So that means when you say nucleus of neocerebellum, that means it receives afferent. It receives the afferent fiber from the Purkinje cell, by the Purkinje cell from the posterior lobe or the portion which comes under the neocerebellum. Emboliform, fastigial, globose. Now all these three are regarded as nucleus of paleocerebellum. What was the another name for paleocerebellum? That was spinal cerebellum. So all these three are regarded as the nucleus of paleocerebellum. But there comes an important point, that is a vestigial nucleus. Now, generally we say that archaeocerebellum is not having any nuclei. That's not a very strong evidences for that. But as per some new researchers, they're saying that we even do have a nucleus for archaeocerebellum. So we have a nucleus for neocerebellum, paleocerebellum for sure. But a general consideration is there is no nucleus for archaeocerebellum. But now they say that even vestigial nucleus is also, it is there in the paleocerebellum for sure. It is also nucleus of archaeocerebellum. It is also the nucleus of archaeocerebellum. Also the nucleus of archaeocerebellum. So this is about just the introduction about the nuclei. Now coming to how these nuclei are placed, I mean anatomically, which one is lateral, which one is more medial, because they do ask this question. So when you look at the, if let's say this is once again I'm roughly drawing this cerebellum, and once again that is a cortex part. So you obviously in between we have this gray matter. How these nuclei are situated, the most lateral nucleus, guys, if I go in this picture, let's say in this section, let's say this is the lateral side, and this here is a medial side for this diagram. That's it. You've taken a cross section or whatever, and you're looking at a lateral side there, that is a medial side. So the most laterally placed nucleus is dentate. The most laterally placed nucleus is the dentate nucleus. I'm just writing the alphabets only, D for dentate, that is the most laterally placed. That was a question asked once. We just gave them the same highlighter. Most medially placed nucleus is fastigial. Most medially placed nucleus is fastigial. And the remaining two nuclei are present below, in between, that is G and E, that is globose and emboliform. Now these globose and emboliform nuclei, they're present together. I mean, they're separate, but they are present in between the fastigial and dentate nucleus. So they are kind of interposed in between the two, and that's why they together are called as a nucleus interpositus. Nucleus interpositus. Call them nucleus interpositus. If somehow you have a if you forget that which one is nucleus interpositus, is it globose or emboliform or fastigial, or if you have that kind of confusion, you can always use this mnemonic here, like D, E, F, G, H and I. I'm extending it even further. So D, E, F, G, you know the deep cerebellar nuclei. I'm just writing H and I just for the convenience sake, so that you can identify that which one is interpositus. Now when I say nucleus interpositus, I for interpositus, keep on jumping on one, guys. From leave the H, go to G, leave the F, come to E. This one. So just taking the alternate one here. And that's what we said, that emboliform plus globose is equal to I. I is what? Interpositus. So you just have to choose the alternate one. You write D, E, F, G, H, I and choose the alternate one. So emboliform and globose will remind you that these are the two which comes in between the dentate and fastigial, and we call them nucleus interpositus. Just a way to remember it. Now what else we have in white matter? I mean, these deep cerebellar nuclei are present in the white matter only. Apart from that, what else will be there in the white matter are the afferent fibers. Now these are the one which are giving the efferent. The efferent will go out from these dentate and other nuclei here. What about the afferent fiber coming inside cerebellum? They are coming from outside. Many tracts are coming inside the cerebellum. There was a dorsal spinocerebellar, ventral spinocerebellar, pontocerebellar, cuniocerebellar. So all these tracts coming in. So whatever afferent fiber comes inside cerebellum, we divide them in two categories. Few of the fibers are called as the mossy fibers, and few are called as the climbing fibers, depending upon to what level they will reach. Let me discuss that with you. So what I'm saying, that when it comes to the afferent fibers, they are of two types. We got two type of afferent fiber. We got climbing fibers, and then we have the second type is the mossy fibers. Climbing fibers and mossy fibers. See, what's the difference is, if once again I sketch this the section of gray matter for us, let's say again a cerebellar cortex we are looking at with its 3 layer. And once again I'm putting this Purkinje cell, this flask shaped Purkinje cells. There goes the dendrite in the layer above, and here comes the axon going all the way out of the cortex, right? Just once again drawing this cerebellar cortex. Now we said two types of ascending or afferent fibers. So afferent fiber obviously will come from the white matter into gray matter. Now this time they will be going in this direction. Now number one type that we said climbing fibers. Well, the name suggests we call them climbing fibers because of their climbing capability. So climbing fibers are those, writing in short CF, climbing fibers are those which can climb through all the layer and reach the topmost layer to directly make a synapse with the Purkinje cell. That's why they are called as a climbing fiber, because of their climbing capability. No problem there. But the only fibers which are climbing, that is two. One is olivocerebellar. There are two tracts. One is called as a olivocerebellar tract, obviously coming from olivary nucleus. Olivocerebellar tract. And there is para-olivocerebellar. Para-olivocerebellar tract. Olivocerebellar and para-olivocerebellar tract are the only tract which comes from this white matter, goes into the gray matter and reach the topmost layer, directly synapse with Purkinje cells. That was one type, one category, climbing. What about mossy fibers? Now, mossy fibers, like let's say this MF is the mossy fiber here. Mossy fibers are those which are limited only to the granular layer. Now you can see they're reaching the granular layer and they're ending there only. You can remember it for the word mossy. Mossy will remind you of something old. Mossy G. Mossy cannot go beyond the ground floor. She is just reaching the ground floor only. Climbing is climbing. It is climbing to the top layer. So mossy fibers, once they reach the granular layer, they will end there. But see, what is the point of having mossy fiber reaching only to this layer? Because anyways, everything has to go to the Purkinje cell, then only the efferent will come out. So these mossy fiber need to get connected to the Purkinje cell, and it will be done by the cells present in the granular layer. If you remember guys, in the granular layer, what was the only excitatory cell we have? And that was granule cells, and that's why it is excitatory. The granule cell, the only excitatory granule cell, is the one which is forming the connection between the mossy fiber and the Purkinje cell. So here we have an interlinking cell in between, that is granule cell. And this region of synapse, this site of the synapse between the granule cell and mossy fiber is called as cerebellar, the cerebellar glomeruli. It's called as cerebellar glomeruli. And you must have noticed one thing, that anything and everything present in this layer, in the granular layer, their spelling starts with alphabet G only. The layer is what? Granular layer. G for granular layer. What cells we have inside? We have Golgi cells and granule cells. G. And now we are saying it is also having what? Cerebellar glomeruli. Another G. So one easy way to remember that the things which are present in the granular layer, their spelling starts with alphabet G only. Granule cells, Golgi cells, glomeruli, they're all present in granular layer. Now the question is, what type of fibers or which tracts are mossy fibers? Well, everything else. Only two tracts are climbing fiber. That means any other tract coming inside the cerebellum, they are all mossy fibers. The spinocerebellar, the pontocerebellar, the cuniocerebellar, dash cerebellar, whatever it is. If it is coming inside the cerebellum, And if it is not olive or para-olivary, so it is mossy. So rest all of them. Rest all other tracts are mossy fibers. Rest all other tracts are mossy fibers. So guys, with that, we have what we have done till now. We have discussed about the classification of the cerebellum based on its evolution. We looked into the gray matter, the cortex, the cerebellar cortex part. We saw in the white matter of the cerebellum about the deep cerebellar nuclei. And now we are looking at the afferent fibers in the same white matter, the two types, climbing and the mossy. Now we got enough raw material with us to talk about the cerebellar peduncles. Now, though cerebellar peduncle is a kind of topic which in a way should be done at the very end, because there's so many tracts coming inside the cerebellum and going out. But specifically, if I talk from the MCQ point of view, it's easy to depict the answer from the cerebellar peduncle, because we have 3 cerebellar peduncle, and if you somehow manages to remember 2, you anyways remember third one only. You can do by the method of elimination. If it is not in the superior peduncle or middle peduncle, it obviously will be present in the inferior peduncle. That's how you can approach these kind of questions. To understand the cerebellar peduncle, we also have to understand the comparator function of cerebellum. So important thing is here, that before I draw this cerebellar peduncle thing, I wanted to understand that what is the comparator function, guys. What do you mean by comparator function? Well, comparison. Cerebellum will compare the different inputs coming in, and then we will process the information and give it to the cerebrum. Well, how it is now? Let's take one simple example. If I have to do an elbow flexion, guys. If I need to do the elbow flexion and I want to do this elbow flexion with complete coordination and control, what all things will be needed for the cerebellum? The first thing is, first I need to know that the proprioception coming from the elbow, isn't it? First I need to know that what is the proprioceptive position of elbow. Is it flexed? Is it semi-flexed? Is it extended? And while it is flexing, how much it is flexing? So all that proprioceptive information need to go into the cerebellum. What were the tracts? What were the tracts carrying unconscious proprioception? It was dorsal spinocerebellar, it was ventral spinocerebellar, and for the upper limb specifically, it was the cuneo-cerebellar. If you remember, cuneo-cerebellar, dorsal spinocerebellar, ventral spinocerebellar. So all spinocerebellar overall. So all these tracts are ultimately going into cerebellum, and they are the one which are telling the cerebellum that what is the position of the particular joint or the muscles around it. One. Second thing, well, who is producing the movement? If I am saying elbow flexion, the elbow flexion movement is done by the cerebrum. My cerebrum is the one which is giving off the corticospinal tract, and corticospinal tract, then anterior horn cells come through certain nerves, let's say the one which is supplying the biceps muscle, and the flexion is taking place. So ultimately, cerebrum is the one which is doing the movement. So when cerebrum will do any movement at any joint, a copy of that information also goes to cerebellum. The tract which is responsible for these movements are what? Corticospinal tract, isn't it? Pyramidal tract or corticospinal tract. So corticospinal tract will come down and produce a movement at whatever joint we talk about. But the copy of corticospinal tract should also go to the cerebellum. And anything going into cerebellum has to go through the bridge. What is the bridge? Bridge is pons. Bridge is pons. So what should be the name of the copy of corticospinal tract? Now this is corticospinal coming, let's say, to the and producing the elbow flexion. And the copy will be called as a cortico-pontocerebellar, because they have to go through the pons and into cerebellum. So we call it cortico-pontocerebellar. Many authors simply call them pontocerebellar, but the full name is cortico-pontocerebellar tract. Understood? So now we have two things. Now my cerebellum is receiving two types of information, one from the periphery and one from the center. Peripheral information includes the spinocerebellar tract coming in, and central information is the copy of corticospinal tract. Now everything reaches the cerebellum. Cerebellum can compare that what cerebrum is trying to do or intend to do, and what exactly movement is taking place at that particular elbow, at particular joint. So the information will be processed in the cerebellum. And which part of cerebellum? That is the neocerebellum. It is processed in the neocerebellum. We just discussed what is the nucleus of neocerebellum. That is dentate nucleus. So that's why what will happen from the cerebellum, from the dentate nucleus of cerebellum, the efferent will come out. Afferent has all gone in. Now the efferent from the cerebellum will come out. Now I want you to think about it. Whatever efferents are coming out of the cerebellum, where they should go? Should they go to the spinal cord or to the cerebrum? I mean, if you have to choose one, which is your best answer here? Well, they should go to the cerebrum, because I told you cerebellum cannot change the movement. Even if the movement is not coordinated, the efferent coming out of the cerebellum will not go directly into the spinal cord and supply the muscle. No, no, no. Cerebellum function is to give the efferent so that they can go back into the cerebrum to the motor cortex and influence the motor cortex. And then motor cortex is the one which has to do the changes, whether to increase the movement or decrease the movement, and that's how it is done. And this entire circuit which is being formed is what you call as the comparator function of the cerebellum. This goes on every time, all the time. It keeps on happening here. Even I'm like when I'm doing like this is all this coordination when I'm rotating both my hand is done by the cerebellum only, but obviously with the help of cerebrum, because it keeps on giving the feedback. Time to put whatever we discussed on a diagram, and that will help us understand the major tracts, if not all, major tracts from the cerebellum peduncle. Okay. So guys, let us say this here is the cerebral cortex. Cerebral, I'm saying cerebrum first. Cerebral cortex. Here we got three parts of the brainstem: midbrain, pons, and let's say medulla oblongata. Midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. And this midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, they are connected to the cerebellum by the respective cerebellar peduncle. So we got a superior cerebellar peduncle, we have this middle, and then we have this inferior cerebellar peduncle, which is connecting it to the cerebellum, right? We already know that is superior, that is middle, that is inferior cerebellar peduncle. We already discussed that. They are the one connecting to the respective part of the brainstem. Okay. Now let me just draw the tract, and I want you to think about it. Now, what is the tract we've already discussed in the spinal cord? The tract which will go all the way down to the lower part of medulla oblongata. Lower part of medulla oblongata decussates there and then reach the spinal cord. Well, easy. That is what? That is a corticospinal or pyramidal tract. 90% fiber will decussate. So this here is the corticospinal tract. This is the corticospinal tract. If this is corticospinal tract, we just said what is a copy of corticospinal tract? That is cortico reaching the pons, ponto, and cerebellum, which tells you clearly that obviously the name says pontocerebellar. So if it is a pontocerebellar, and what is the peduncle for pons? Middle only. So it is the tract which is occupying the middle cerebellar peduncle. This tract is pontocerebellar. Cortico-pontocerebellar tract, and as a matter of fact, the middle cerebellar peduncle is occupied mainly by this tract, and middle cerebellar peduncle is the only peduncle out of three which is purely afferent. You can note that middle cerebellar peduncle is purely afferent. Nothing will be seen going out of this peduncle. It just comes in and in only. Middle cerebellar peduncle is purely afferent. Middle cerebellar peduncle is purely afferent, and it is the largest peduncle. It's a huge peduncle. We have so many tracts coming from it. It's the largest peduncle also. Middle cerebellar peduncle. See how it makes sense. It's the largest peduncle. It is carrying the copy of corticospinal tract. Imagine huge, probably the largest tract, and you have to carry the copy of that tract inside. So you got to be the largest one. So because it is carrying the copy of this corticospinal tract, so cortico-pontocerebellar tract entering to middle cerebellar peduncle. Middle cerebellar peduncle is the largest and the only peduncle which is purely afferent. Nothing goes out of it. Talking about some tracts coming in the cerebellum from where? From the peripheral part, from the spinal cord, guys. Spinocerebellar tract. Dorsal spinocerebellar, ventral spinocerebellar. If you remember, dorsal spinocerebellar tract was the one which was taking a short course, so it was entering through the inferior peduncle. And then we also have a tract coming from the accessory cuneate nucleus, which is for the upper limb basically. That is cuneocerebellar tract. This is cuneocerebellar tract. And this one is dorsal. Dorsal spinocerebellar. Dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Dorsal spinocerebellar tract is coming from inferior peduncle. What about ventral? Ventral we said which was going to the other side, ascending all the way up and then coming back through what peduncle? The superior peduncle. Yes, it gives collateral to the all three peduncles on the other side, but predominantly the ventral spinocerebellar tract is present in the superior peduncle. Ventral spinocerebellar tract present in the superior peduncle. Afferent, major afferent, done. Time for the efferent. Now we said efferent from the cerebellum goes from where? From the deep cerebellar nuclei. And the deep cerebellar nuclei which will give off the efferent here is the dentate nucleus. This may not be the exact position, but I'm just drawing it in the shape. You remember it? That's a dentate nucleus present in the white matter of the cerebellum. Now please understand this, guys. The efferent which will go out of the dentate nucleus. Now where they are supposed to go? These dentate nucleus fibers will come out here, and obviously they have to go to the cortex, into the motor area of the cortex to influence the motor cortex. But we know nothing can reach the cortex directly unless you relay in the thalamus. So there must be some nucleus in the thalamus where it will go and relay. Secondly, when we are talking about the descending tract, we said red nucleus, rubrospinal tract. In certain lower animals, that is the highest, like what you say, the motor system that we have. In human, it is a pyramidal tract, which is the highest motor system. But in lower animals, it's a rubrospinal tract. So that red nucleus is present where? It is present in the midbrain only. So some fibers will go like this. They go from the dentate nucleus to the red nucleus, and then from red nucleus they will project again into the thalamus and then a cortex. So fibers coming from the dentate nucleus, or the feedback coming from the dentate nucleus, will go to the thalamus and cortex, and there are also some fiber which will come from the dentate nucleus to the red nucleus and then upward to thalamus here. What I'm saying is, if this is thalamus here, and let me tell you what nucleus of thalamus this time. This time it is ventrolateral nucleus. We'll be discussing this part in the thalamus. What nucleus we already discussed is VPL and VPM, ventro-posterior lateral, ventro-posterior medial. I told you VPL is carrying the information from below, this part here. That is VPL. VPM was carrying the general sensation information from here. Okay. Now VL, ventrolateral nucleus, is about cerebellum. The tracts coming from cerebellum will go into VL, ventrolateral nucleus. And let's say this here is the red nucleus of the contralateral side. This is a red nucleus. I'm writing RN, that is red nucleus. So look, fiber coming from the dentate nucleus, some will go directly to the thalamus like this, will relay in the VL nucleus, and obviously then fibers will extend into the cortex. That's one type of feedback. Other type of feedback is fibers will come here to the red nucleus, and from red nucleus we have fiber extending into the thalamus, and the same story again into it. So that's the feedback. So what are the two feedback tract which you see in the superior cerebellar peduncle? One, well, looking at their pathway, you can call it dentato-thalamic or dentato-rubrothalamic via red nucleus. So we got dentato-thalamic, dentato-thalamic tract, and then we have dentato rubrothalamic tract. Dentato-rubrothalamic. So I can say ventral spinocerebellar tract 1, dentato-rubrothalamic 2, and dentato-thalamic 3. These are the three major tracts which are seen going from which peduncle? superior cerebellar peduncle. They are seen going from the superior cerebellar peduncle. So superior, mainly, I'm not saying there's the only tracts. We have like many tracts inside, but you don't know the function of many of them. So 3 tracts from superior peduncle, 1 from the middle peduncle, and rest everything. Most of the rest of the tracts are coming from the inferior peduncle here. From the MCQ point of view, especially, I would say that these are the tracts to be remembered. And remember the superior peduncle and middle peduncle, because inferior peduncle is not only having these 2 tracts. There's so many tracts entering through inferior peduncle. Like we say dorsal spinocerebellar, cuneo-cerebellar, there is a reticulocerebellar, vestibulocerebellar, olivocerebellar, para-olivocerebellar. And then we have their opposite also, efferent going out, cerebello-olivary, cerebello-para-olivary, cerebello-reticular, cerebello-vestibular. So there's no point in trying to remember so many things, which is, you later on, which you might forget. It's the easy way. Superior peduncle, most important 3 tracts from superior peduncle. Middle peduncle, purely afferent. It is all about corticopontocerebellar, and rest everything is from inferior peduncle. Rest everything from inferior peduncle. So this is about the discussion on the cerebellum part.